because I know we'll have a few people chiming to get in. So. All right. I know that we'll probably have a few other people chime in to get in, but I'm just going to jump in and get started so that we can cover everything in the hour that we have together. So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming and welcome to our presentation on the introduction of the Utah State General Retention Schedules. I'm going to go ahead and ask Matt to advance to the next slide. So just before we get started, there's a few housekeeping things to consider. I'm sure all of you are experts at virtual meetings by now, but just so that you are aware, go ahead and please mute your microphone throughout the duration of the training. We'll have some dedicated time at the end of the presentation for questions. So if you're more comfortable asking those verbally during the Q&A section, you can of course raise your hand using the little raise your hand icon there on the screen during the Q&A period. Otherwise, go ahead and mute your mic throughout the presentation. We are going to take questions throughout the presentation, though, in the chat box, which you can see in the far corner there. So if you have questions throughout the presentation, you're more than welcome to type those in the chat box. If we can answer them in the chat box, we certainly will as we go. If not, we'll ask those out loud during the question and answer period. And just so that you are aware, we are recording this training so that we can put it up to be viewed later if you want to rewatch it or share it with anyone. So we are recording. So you may choose to mute your video camera as well, since we will be recording, just so that you're aware of that. So yep, that's just a few housekeeping items. So you can go ahead and advance the slide there. So yeah, as we jump in, I just want to say hello. My name is Heidi Steed, and I am the Local Government Records and Information Management Specialist here at State Archives. It is my role to sort of act as the point person for any records related questions that local governments may have. So records management, access, preservation. If you have a question about your records, you are more than welcome to reach out to me and I will help try and find the best service or person to answer those questions. Presenting with me today is Matt Pierce, and I will turn the time over to Matt and let him introduce himself.
Hi, my name's Matt. I am the General Retention Schedule Records and Information Management Specialist here at the State Archives, and I'm the newest Records and Information Management Specialist on staff. I've been here for a year and a half, and I've inherited kind of a big job. I'm sure you're all aware the General Retention Schedule is very large, and we're working on improving it. So that's kind of my responsibility, and really I'm the your go-to person for any GRS questions or issues.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So today, just briefly, what we're going to be covering. So we're going to be covering some general retention schedule basics. So what we're hoping to do today is introduce you to the general retention schedule and its basic concepts, how it is intended to work, how we go about creating them, the process we go about creating them. And then we're hoping to cover some common schedules that people are probably most likely going to be used. And we're going to use those to sort of show you how you can sort of read and interpret the general schedules and some tips and tricks for how you can apply them in your offices. So that's our intentions for today. So yeah, let's jump right in.
All right, so really quick, some definitions. What are general retention schedules? Many of you are probably aware what a records retention schedule is. It defines how long a record series must be kept and provides disposal guidelines for how that series should be discarded. A general retention schedule is general. Basically, it's applicable to two or more groups of records. It's also applicable to two or more different government agencies. And the idea is to create sort of a general records retention schedule that covers, can apply to as many people as it can. So what does the GRS look like and why? I'm going to just share a screenshot of what it looks like. Essentially, the main interface that we have for the general retention schedule is a search box. And it is equipped with a bunch of filtering mechanisms as well. There are some advanced search options that allow you to really sort of drill down into some fields. But yeah, that's kind of our really what we've ended up moving to. A lot of you are aware we used to have, books that we published and compiled that had lists of general retention schedules. They're actually really specific for general retention schedules, and so I'm going to explain a little bit why we moved to this interface and sort of what's going on with it. So basically, our move is explained because, as I'm sure you're all aware, government is growing increasingly large and complicated and dynamic. We are changing processes more frequently than we ever have before. It seems like, every few months, some process changes or is introduced. And so basically, our idea behind the GRS is to slowly, piece by piece, generalize the large pool of schedules that we've inherited and make them applicable to more people, make them resilient. So, so when little things in processes change, the GRS still applies. That process, our process for updating the GRS involves multiple stages of feedback and committee approvals. And right now, generally speaking, that allows for a few major updates per month. We do try and accomplish more minor updates than that. So that is really kind of a big picture overview of where we're at, why we're doing what we're doing, just to kind of loop you in and make you aware of sort of what our vision is looking like. Um, so just a couple of quick concepts that can really help guide your approach to the general attention schedules and to looking for those schedules that really apply to you. So the sort of the three concepts here are function, process, and then context. And then function is kind of like when you think of when you know see a box of records. um, uh, one helpful way to think about records is what is the bigger function of the place where I work, and how does that function relate to these records, and to sort of make that maybe a little more specific. um, you'll want to think about function when you're using our general retention schedule search interface, because we have a list of categories that sort of allow you to filter by like administrative records or financial management records or human resource records or payroll processing. There are a bunch of different functions listed in that category tree. They aren't all strictly functions. Sometimes it's like higher education or sort of more, different types of government agencies are also included in there. Um, so that's kind of function in a nutshell. You also want to think about process. What is the process that created the records that you're looking at? When you're trying to find a GRS that fits. Um, uh, for instance, local government accounts payable and receivable records. That schedule might apply to like a couple of different forms or receipts or things of that nature. So when you're looking for, I'm going to show you an example in a minute. When you're looking for, a GRS that covers those records, if you look for receipts, that might, you want to think about process, as opposed to like, okay, really specific, what is this form? um, Also, context, because this is a big pool of schedules that we sort of combined from different contexts. You want to keep in mind that when you're looking at schedules, sometimes it can be helpful to note that the previous schedule number has some information, pertinent information in it. These prefixes for state government, county, or municipal can be helpful. There's also one SD for school district. So I know this is a lot of information. Hopefully, this is somewhat helpful. Just a real quick illustration here in the GRS search. You can see here are a list of categories. This I have found to be one of the most helpful ways to find the right schedule for the records I'm looking at. And hopefully it is also helpful. It'll also be helpful to you. You'll also want to note up here, and I think we cover this a little later, but we have made discontinued schedules. They are able to be viewed. That can be really helpful for folks who are used to some old schedules and wondering where that schedule moved to. Because there's a lot of information in those discontinued schedules about that. But we just have this, sometimes just having the current selected is a good way to filter out a lot of schedules. So just an example of thinking about process as opposed to like specific forms. If you search for receipts in the GRS, you get a lot of discontinued schedules. Some are crosswalked to, um, certain schedules. I believe our audience here is mostly local government folks. So, welcome. Uh, in your case, for the most part, a local government accounts payable and receivable records would be the schedule you're looking for those kinds of records. Whereas if you, so, and in order to sort of find this, you would really want to use that categories tool that we sort of showed you before. That's a really good guide to point you in the right direction. Whereas if you just search for receipts, you'll be presented with a lot of different schedules, some of which might not really fit what you're looking for. Although, yeah. Okay. So that sort of covers that. Really quick, I'm going to go over how we create general retention schedules. So this process involves appraisal across a lot of different agencies. Um, uh, Agencies can be very different. Um, the idea is to find and identify similar functions and the records produced by them that can be grouped together. This takes a lot of information gathering, a lot of legwork, a lot of like proactive reaching out, and really it's where your feedback is crucial, crucial to the process of making the general retention schedule work for both you and for everyone else. So our approval process it's fairly involved. We start with an issue, and that can come from you folks. That can come internally. It can come just about everywhere. Someone notices something. There is a question. There is some confusion. This doesn't make any sense, and then that kind of gets sent to me. With everyone's feedback here on the records and information management team, I put together a plan of action and an update proposal. That's usually a draft in a Google document form that proposes like a new schedule or a change, a retention change. Sometimes crosswalks are included in that. And then we go to a feedback process. And that feedback process, we send you guys targeted emails. We also include the feedback in our monthly newsletter, and then we have a web page where you can view all of that. And then there are two committee approvals. We have an internal committee approval to make sure it's like good from an appraisal standpoint, and then the records management committee is a public committee that is tasked with these kinds of changes. This is a real quick screenshot of the current updates page. You all might be familiar with it. We'll be sharing these slides afterwards, so you can reference anything like URLs or whatnot. And Heidi's going to go ahead and cover creating your own GRS.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Matt. So as you all may or may not be aware, because we do have a primarily local government audience here today, Utah law allows for political subdivisions or local governments to create or adopt a policy relating to information practices, which can cover a lot of things, but particularly relevant to this training, that code allows local governments to adopt policies and ordinances related to records retention. So I'll let you go ahead and, yeah, thanks, Matt. So as you can see here, Utah code, this is in the government records access and management. So grandma, this code is Utah 63G-2-7012A. And this particular code allows for local policies to be adopted, and many local governments have adopted such policies. This can mean that you adopt a very broad and specific policy for your city or town or county, but you may also just pass a policy adopting the state's schedule as the schedule that your particular government will follow. You don't have to adopt a policy or resolution saying that you're going to use the state schedule. If you aren't creating your own or haven't created your own, it's assumed that you're following the state schedule. Go ahead and slide to the next one there, Matt. So there is another portion of Utah code, that same section of code, just a little bit further down in section 3, that says that any policy or ordinance that you choose to adopt should follow the standards comparable to section 63A, which this particular section of code is the code that State Archives uses when we are creating and implementing general retention schedules. So you can go ahead and go to the next one too, Matt. So when they say creating a comparable approval process, that can certainly be open for interpretation. And as you are going to create your own, you would certainly get the advice of your city or county attorneys about what that might look like for your government. But certainly our process, as Matt mentioned, goes through a public board. The Records Management Committee is a publicly approved board with members that are appointed by the governor. It is subject to the Public Meetings Act. So that gets approved in a publicly noticed meeting. So you may choose to approve your own types of policies through a similar process where you are following a process that you might use for approving other public policies. Something to consider, as Matt mentioned, when we were talking about functional schedules being sort of the way that we're moving because of how complicated government is getting and how adaptable our retention schedules need to be to changing processes, because processes are quickly changing, new forms are being added, new ways of collecting forms are being added. We want to create schedules that don't need to be changed every time a function or a process changes. As long as they are function-based, we can capture that information regardless of the records that get produced. So that's something that you might keep in mind when you're creating your own schedules, since you may need to adapt to changing processes. And if your locally approved schedules are too specific, you might find that you're going back and fixing them to adjust for those things all of the time. So something to consider when you're adopting your own schedules is making sure that they're flexible enough that you're not needing to change them all of the time. And another thing to consider too, just like we do here at State Archives, you're essentially, when you're creating your own schedule, you're just doing it at a smaller scale. So all of the same processes that we go through to sort of collect feedback from people who are creating these records, you may choose to follow the same processes locally as you seek out information from people who create those records, finding out the retention periods that will work best for them. So yeah, I think you can go ahead and skip to that next one. So I think one of the things that will be helpful now is we're going to jump into a few case studies of various retention schedules that have been created here at State Archives and sort of been expanded a little over time. And one of those is our permit and licensing general schedule. You can go ahead and switch to the next slide there, Matt. Thanks. So this is an example of where we have taken a lot of various schedules from across various governments and created what we would call a big bucket retention schedule, which is meant to capture records that would fall into this particular category. So it's not going to be very specific to the types of forms that get collected, but rather very specific to a type of function or process that your government might do. So the types of permits that might fall under this is going to vary from government to government based on what that particular government's function is and what kind of permits they issue. So it's not going to be very specific, but it is specific to a permitting process. And then the types of forms that various governments create throughout the permitting process will also vary. But this type of schedule is meant to capture whatever that type of record, whatever records those might be. So if there are various forms you have to fill out for a single permit in your government, this schedule would encompass all of those. So it's meant to be flexible based on individual local practices. So you can go ahead and skip to the next one there, Matt. This is also a schedule where when you're reading through the description, it offers you some clues that other retention schedules may apply. And this is one such schedule where it hints that if you are keeping indexes for your types of permits, those might have a permanent retention based on their historic value. And as you can see, there is a related schedule, which is GRS 439, which is for permanent building indexes. One of the things to consider about the general retention schedule, which is one of those sort of common misconceptions about the general schedule, is the GRS isn't an inventory of records that you need to create. The general retention schedule basically tells you how to manage what you do create. So you won't look to the general retention schedule to tell you what you should have in your office. There may be various code and law that dictates what records you are required to create, and you'd be responsible for knowing what records your individual offices have an obligation to create. But the general retention schedule and the state archives won't tell you what you have to have. The general retention schedule will just provide some time limits and guidelines for how long those should be kept and when they should be destroyed. So you can click onto the next one. This is also one of the examples of a schedule where we are collecting feedback. We're always collecting feedback about the general retention schedules that we create. But this is one that we often collect feedback on based on how people use it, how the description helps them implement it in their offices. So we, like Matt mentioned earlier, this is a crucial part of our general retention schedule improvement process, is getting that feedback from you. So whenever you're using a general schedule, you can always scroll down to the end of it on our website, and there is a link there where you can provide feedback about how it might be improved or questions that you have about being able to implement it. And then we can use that data that we gather from you guys to improve the overall usage of the schedules. And I'll turn that one over to you, Matt.
Great. Thanks, Heidi. My case study is on open meeting minutes and supplementary materials. And this is one of those examples that these kinds of records, it is dictated by Utah code that, government agencies keep a record of their meetings, basically I'm going to give you a brief overview of this schedule. Basically, open meeting minutes and supplementary materials are and we call this the Open and Public Meetings Act. It's in the Utah Code, and it goes into a lot of detail about what kinds of meetings are covered and sort of the form the documentation needs to take. But these schedules kind of give you a really quick overview of how to keep and manage those records. there's the main schedule 1709. You might also notice there are open meeting recordings. The idea behind these two schedules is that the official the official record of the meeting is approved minutes, and the idea is that the recordings are temporary. You'll notice there's a 3-year after approval of written minutes retention retention statement here. And then also there are closed meeting records. They have the same retention as the open ones. So one kind of important FYI, many government agencies, local government agencies, they're posting their minutes to the public notice website. We also administer that website, and those meeting minutes are available through the website, but agencies are still obligated themselves to manage their records according to these retention schedules. So just FYI, there has been some question about, well, if I post it to the website, it's taken care of. You are still obligated to manage the records. I just wanted to, make that, give you folks that info. And then, so open meeting minutes and supplementary materials. I'm just going to give you this is a quick example of a schedule we recently updated based on feedback from you folks, and I forget who specifically brought it to our attention, but there was some question and confusion about meeting packets because the previous language in the retention schedule left it a little bit ambiguous whether or not meeting packets were included because they're distributed before the meeting, and it's a lot of material. So we're definitely aware of that. But this is an example of an update that we really try to key into your feedback on, and we felt like it ended up being a successful sort of run of that feedback process. And we did end up adding that language into the new description. You can see here's a reference to the code for OPMA. So yeah, I'm going to pass the baton to Heidi for the next case study.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So yeah, this last case study from me is for the employee history records. I'll let you skip to the next slide there, Matt. This is the schedule that I often tell people is the set of records that feels permanent but isn't actually permanent, because this is a set of records that has a pretty long retention period and can collect rather quickly in a lot of people's record storage. It has a retain for 65 years after date of hire, or retain 3 years after retirement or death. That long period, that 65-year period, can sort of transcend a couple of different records officers. So it's very possible that this record could be in your offices over the course of 2 or 3 people's careers. So it is one of those records where having a good plan of action for how to manage them will be important, because it won't be a singular person's job to manage them. This is also an example of a set of records where the retention period for this particular record type is directly taken from Utah code. So in many cases, when we're creating retention schedules, we are typically appraising how long those records will be used in office, how long they have an administrative need. We're getting feedback from you guys to figure out that length of time. This is an example of a schedule where it's pretty much spelled out in law that you are required to keep things for this very specific retention period, which is why this particular schedule reads the way that it does. And as you can see in the appraisal statement that you would find on our website under this retention schedule, it does reference the Utah code where we're deriving this particular retention. So you can go ahead and change the slide there. So this is also an example of where the law has a very specific retention that it requires for these records, but the law is also very clear about what purpose this particular retention period relates to. And in this case, the employee history records, as you can see from the description, are the records that are meant to be kept to calculate an individual's benefits that they would have received or accrued over a career. And so those are the particular records that have that particular retention that applies to them. The tricky thing about an employee's file, as it collects a variety of records over time. So in addition to the records that are required for this particular function to calculate benefits, you might find a variety of records that will have accumulated but don't necessarily relate to that particular unique legal purpose that this schedule requires. So you might determine that other schedules apply to the records that have collected in that employee's file. So you can go ahead and change the slide there. So this is an example of where your agency might choose to create a particular policy or procedure around this retention schedule so that you can give direction to individuals who manage these records of what to do when an employee no longer works for your agency. Are you going to just move the entire file off-site, or are you going to weed out some of those records in order to make room in storage? These are all decisions. These are difficult decisions to make. They are sometimes not easy decisions to make, and they often are dependent on how much time and staff you have available. So every records management decision is also determined by how much time you have to put into managing the records, each individual record. And so as you can see from the retention here, there's the retained 65 years after date of hire, or 3 years after retirement or death. If you have the ability to manage individual files after a retirement or death date, you could certainly implement that level of records management for these types of records. But most people choose, because they don't have the time for that level of management, to just retain from the hire date, because that's an easier form of management for this record type. But you could certainly create a policy that helps you determine what that looks like for your individual office. I can go ahead and change the slide there, Matt. So this is an example of other record types that may apply within those employee files. So you might have employee training records for trainings that they attended over their career that are contained in an employee file. You might also have performance plans and evaluations if they have annual evaluation plans that come up every year. Those might accumulate in an employee's file as well, and those don't necessarily need to be retained for that 65-year period. So you may choose, based on your available resources, both staff and like physical space resources, to weed out certain things when you go to store something long term, just to make extra space. But that is really up to your department based on what you have the ability to do. Go ahead and change that too.
Okay, so for our fourth and final case study, I'm going to be presenting on really on video footage. Dispatch and surveillance are the names of the schedules involved. As far as I'm aware, that covers most of the video footage that government agencies collect. I'm sure there are other processes or functions out there that involve video, but I'm just kind of be going to be kind of focusing on this area. So, so yeah, we have two major schedules that cover this kind of video footage. We have dispatch and patrol records. That's body cam footage, dash cam footage. And then we have surveillance recordings. That's surveillance of government property, but also recordings like from government vehicles. Think of recycling trucks or anything else. Recycling trucks is the main one I can think of. So you'll notice for these schedules, retention is very flexible. We have a statement that says resolution of issue. And the idea behind that retention is to allow agencies the ability to deal with the fact that footage, storage requirements are voluminous, and that most footage does not document some kind of something that happened. Most footage does not. So this is where an agency would want to sort of step in and have a more specific policy for the retention of that non-incident footage. Something spelled out. Is it 10 days, 30 days, 3 months? Some kind of length of time is a good idea to have in a policy there. These schedules are also a good example of, and this happens in a couple of other areas in the general retention schedule, where records can switch schedules. It's a little odd, but so for this example, if something happens and your footage captures an incident, that footage, that record, is suddenly it is part of another function or another process, and it becomes covered by another general retention schedule. And the examples I have here are surveillance recordings. Think of those recycling trucks. If there's some kind of accident, suddenly footage becomes part of a risk management case file, or some other case file. We have a couple different types in the GRS. Think about dispatch and patrol records, body cam or dash cam. There's an incident that's captured. That record becomes part of another process, some kind of investigation, some kind of potential disciplinary action. We have another general retention schedule that covers that. There's also like a complaint general retention schedule, and then that switch sets you up well to manage that record appropriately, in an instance where some kind of legal action happens. It basically kind of it helps you back up your record keeping processes, if that makes sense. Yeah, and I'm going to kind of try and state this clearly. So the general idea is that in this case, in many other cases, relying on and citing our general retention schedules when you are documenting your record keeping policies, when you're documenting your record keeping actions, they can show that you are compliant with applicable record keeping requirements. It's an effective way to mitigate risk, in the instance of some kind of legal action. So that's just one of the many important, the important benefits that that using the general retention schedule can give to your agency. So that covers our presentation. We wanted to leave a lot of time for questions, since we haven't given this kind of training in quite a while, and there were many people who were interested in this. So we would love to just sort of open the floor up if anyone has any questions they want to ask, via their audio or chat. We are all ears.
Um, Matt, while we're waiting for questions to come in, would you like to show um, the website and how to access the general retention schedule search, as well as where people would find like proposed schedules and feedback?
I would love to. Yes. Yeah. I was going to do that earlier and I forgot. So thank you for reminding me. So I'm going to whip out of the presentation real quick, and sort of show you. This is just a bookmark I have that goes straight into the schedule, the schedule view. But um, let's see. I'm actually going to go back here um, a level, and you'll see that this is sort of the landing page that you'll be presented with if you go to our website and you're looking for the general retention schedules. It'll land you here, and that breadcrumb comes from our menu here, and then retention schedules, just FYI. And we recently added this view all button because it's a little confusing that, oh, search, what do I even enter? And so we wanted people to be able to just like go straight into everything. And let's see, we have a question in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read it out loud, if you don't mind. It's from Stacy Wallum, and she asks, what about format? Is there a specific format that records need to be in, specifically employee files? Does it need to be the original documents, or can they be scanned copies or PDF documents of the originals? I think I'm going to, Heidi, do you mind? Can I have you answer that one?
Yeah. So the legal requirement for record keeping is, as far as retention is required to be applied to the record copy, or we often will say the official copy of a record. So if there are multiple versions of something, the retention only needs to apply to one record, and that is the official one. The nice thing is that designation of sort of official copy or record copy is up to your agency to determine. So if your agency chooses to retain the scanned copy or PDF copy as your copy of record or your official record, that's absolutely fine. It does not need to be in a particular format. You are just then responsible for making sure that that copy that you have designated as the official one is following the retention schedule. So for example, that really long retention period for those employee files, if you're keeping those digitally, and in a lot of cases people are, because this is the 21st century and a lot of us are keeping things digitally, there is an obligation to keep those for that full retention period. So you'll want to make sure that whatever format you're keeping your records in, that you have a plan for keeping them for the legal required period. And if that's electronic records, you're working with your IT department to make sure that those are backed up and protected from deletion. So I hope that somewhat answers the question. So yes, you can keep things in an electronic version that can be your official copy. You just want to make sure that you are able to apply the legal retention.
And oh, great. Stacy says perfect. And just to kind of add just a little thing, the Utah State Archives, we are working on and I don't want to like commit too much out here. We're working very hard on becoming kind of a trusted digital repository, or someone who can partner with agencies, across the state to manage electronic records for longer periods of time. That's something that's in the works. It's we're working on that capacity. So just wanted to put that out there. Thank you for your question. I just wanted to, maybe while we're waiting for any other questions, show you a couple of other features here that may be of interest. So you'll notice under the search bar, there's an advanced search options, a little thing that you can click on that comes down. And we mentioned this before, but there's a previous schedule number field that is sort of available for all our GRS, that allows you to if you have like an older sort of book or publication that has sort of the older numbers that we used to use, and you're wondering how to find. Oh, it looks like we have another question. I'm going to go. Sorry, I'm jumping around here, but I want to get to everyone's questions. So, are we required to upload our minutes to the public notice website in addition to keeping them in our own records? That is a great question. And I think, Heidi, I'm going to let you answer that one again.
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. There's the public notice requirements are different than the records retention requirements. So the public notice website has its own like upload requirements. As of right now, that's basically just considered sort of an access tool as a part of the public notice requirements. So as far as retention of those records, at the current moment, yes, you are required to keep your minutes and supplementary materials yourselves, like manage those in addition to the public notice website. Perhaps in the future, as we're sort of building out our capacity, because we manage both the retention and the public notice website, we can hopefully, I'm not going to make any promises, but perhaps there would be a feature where that upload could also be considered like a digital upload to an archive. At the current moment, that is not the case. So yes, you would want to manage those in addition to uploading.
Heidi, I just have a follow-up question just to make sure we're being clear about Victoria's question. So the public notice requirement of open meeting records, like the requirement to make those available to the public, is that solely covered by the public notice website process, or are agencies able to satisfy that requirement in other ways?
I believe, and I'm not the authority on the public notice
Yeah.
website, so unfortunately I can't help, but I do believe that that is the requirement of the
Okay.
website, or of publicly noticing something,
Okay.
is to make those available. Again, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm not the authority on the public notice
Victoria,
website, but
you may
I believe
want to reach out to our public notice website administrator to get more specifics on that question. And I'm going to go ahead and just type his name in the chat
yeah, I'll throw
box.
his email in there.
Yeah. Um,
So yeah, many of you who've used the Notice website have probably worked with Dylan before. He's the public notice website administrator. Um, yeah, thanks, Rebecca. But I believe OTMA directs what has to be uploaded
yeah,
when you publicly notice something. So that's why I was saying it. There's the sort of legal requirement for publicly noticing, and then the legal requirement for retention, and those are two different things.
thanks for answering that, Heidi. Sorry, I didn't mean to make that more complicated.
No
It
problem.
was. Oh, great. We have about 5 minutes. I'm just going to kind of show you just a couple of other features here, just to kind of, demonstrate this one. Let's actually see what happens when we type that in. Um, the search results, and our apologies here, the search results can be a little bit wonky. We work on improving them, and then it's just a constant process. So um, I
We don't have, unfortunately, we don't have Google money, so our
yeah,
search interface is not as fine tuned as
yeah,
Google.
it can be a little bit wonky. So that there was not great.
Is it possible to click the discontinued just so we could see what one of those discontinued
Yeah,
breadcrumbs might look
yeah,
like?
yeah. Let's take a look at that. So this was recent where we made these discontinued schedules visible on the website at the request of you folks. It is a really useful history to have. Just, right off the bat, you can see we have several um, discontinued. There are breadcrumbs that show often discontinued schedules have been crosswalked to something else. In fact, I think like 98% of them have some have been discontinued because the records are no longer created. Let's see, we have another question.
Yeah.
From Jessica Morgan. She asks, as a new records specialist, I registered as a new records officer on the state site. Is there anything else that needs to be done to update who the records officer is for my agency? And that question, Jessica, I am guessing that you are with a local government agency, but I'm not sure. We divide agencies up here among three of our RIM specialists, and Heidi is the local government RIM specialist, and you would want to just reach out to her to make sure all of those housekeeping items are taken care of. And forgive me, Jessica, if you are with like a state agency or someone else, it may be a different person. So,
I would say feel free to email me. I just threw my Yeah, so it looks like you're with a special district, which is actually another person in
yeah,
our office. But you can email me and I will forward you on to Avalon, who does our special districts. So anyone on the call today is feel free to email me any questions that you have. And I'm happy, if it's me, I'm happy to answer. And if not, I'm happy to direct you in the right way. But yeah,
um,
if you registered on the site, Jess, then we can just make sure you're assigned to your agency, and then you'll get annual reminders for us about your annual certification. So yeah, we'll get you set up and ready to go.
yeah. We're at about time. Heidi, was there anything else that we needed to kind of show people on the website? I guess I did give folks that screenshot showing the updates page, and that'll be in the slides as well. So,
Yeah, I mean, we really touched on the basics of the general schedule. I know people have lots and lots of questions about it. So again, feel free to email me or Matt with
Mhm.
any of your general retention schedule related questions, and we're happy to answer those for you. We'll send out a survey about this training, which will have a little field in it that would, if you have suggestions for general retention schedule type trainings that you'd like to see us do, or really any records related trainings you'd like to see us put on, I highly encourage you to fill that out because that helps us figure out where people's sort of training needs are. So please fill that out when you get the training. But yeah, I hope this was sort of a helpful introduction. And again, feel free to reach out to Matt or I with any additional questions that you guys have.
All right. Oh, we got a couple of thank yous. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And I think we're going to just go ahead and wrap it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.